Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Arizona Illustrated for this Friday, the 13th of July, 2012. I'm Jim Ninsel, host of Political Roundtable, our weekly analysis and commentary on local, state, and national politics. Tonight on the Roundtable, we'll look at the latest fireworks between U.S. Senate candidates Jeff Flake and Will Cardon and talk about a proposition that could change how elections work in Arizona. Joining me this evening is Pima County Democratic Party Chairman Jeff Rogers and Tucson Tea Party founder Trent Humphreys. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining me this evening. Before we begin to dig into the events of the last week, Congressman Ron Barber stopped by the Political Roundtable earlier today to talk about his first few weeks in Washington. Congressman Ron Barber, welcome to the Friday Roundtable.
It's great to be here, thanks. Good to be back in town as well, back home.
Let's get right into it. Certainly one of your more controversial votes that we've seen lately was the Fast and Furious vote. Yes. You voted against criminal contempt of the Attorney General, but voted in favor of a measure that would require the Justice Department, or at least require a court to decide if the Justice Department needed to turn over additional documents in this investigation.
That's right. I never felt that looking at the evidence such as it was that the criminal contempt motion had any real standing. It didn't have any evidence behind it. There's no indication to me that the Attorney General was involved in any kind of criminal activity, and so I voted against that criminal contempt motion or bill. Many of the people in my caucus walked out on that vote, and I felt that for me it was important to stay behind and cast a vote. So it was real clear to the people I represent where I stood on the issue, and so I stayed and voted no on the resolution. The other vote, however, I felt was a lot different. It was about a page-and-a-half resolution. It didn't contain the words contempt at all. In fact, what that motion was all about was to take to the federal court the question of whether or not executive privilege was properly invoked by the president. And if it was, then that will stand. If it wasn't, then documents, such as they may need to be, will be released, redacted, or however they come to the Congress. I think it's about transparency in government. Had there been an executive privilege invoked by a different president, I would have felt the same way, because I think that a lot of times executive privilege has been used inappropriately, and we need to have a third party, in this case the courts, to sort it out. So that's what I was really after. Let's get the facts, let's get the information. And there's a particular Arizona piece to this, personal piece for me, and that is Brian Terry, who was a Border Patrol agent who was shot and killed near Rio Rico. His parents, his family, are still waiting 19 months after his death to find out what happened and how Fast and Furious was connected to his death. They have a right to know that. The public has a right to know what went on, and one way to get at the truth, I think, is to make sure that the court has a way of telling the executive branch and the Congress whether documents relevant to this issue should or should not be released.
And in terms of the flow of weaponry into Mexico from the United States, what do you think the government should be doing in order to interdict some of these weapons?
Well, we certainly shouldn't be walking weapons into Mexico, and that was what Fast and Furious did. And that's what Operation Wide Receiver did under the Bush administration. I mean, these kinds of sting operations happen in law enforcement a lot. But in this particular case, we allowed at least 2,000 weapons to go to Mexico, and we lost track of them, and 2 of them showed up at Brian Terry's murder scene. As far as preventing guns from going south, we need to do as much as we can to do that. We now have CBP, Customs and Border Patrol agents, at the border going south, checking with dogs to see if you're carrying guns or money, for that matter, into Mexico. That's one way to stop or reduce the flow, but we have to make sure that we don't add to the problem that Mexico is having, and now we're having, because those guns are coming back into our country and causing harm. We have to make sure that we don't aid and abet the Mexican criminals and the cartels by allowing guns to go there.
And this week we also had a vote on the repeal of the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and you voted against the repeal.
I did. I voted against it because, to me, to use a well-worn phrase, it would have been throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That repeal bill had said nothing about what we would do to replace those things that are really advantageous to the American people that are in the Affordable Care Act. The bill is far from perfect. It really needs a lot of adjustments and modifications, just like any major piece of legislation that we've seen in this country over time. Social Security, Medicare, Civil Rights Act, all of them required amendments and revisions to deal with unintended consequences and to deal with things that weren't quite right when the passage of the bill first occurred. That's what we should be doing. The American people, I believe, are ready to move on. This issue has been debated upside and down and litigated to the Supreme Court, where it was declared constitutional. It's time to move on and keep those things that are beneficial and take care of the things that are not. We want to make sure that the donut hole continues to be closed. That's in the bill. We want to make sure that people with pre-existing conditions can get health insurance and cannot be denied. That's in the law. We want to make sure that the annual and lifetime cap on medical expenses no longer can prevent people from getting the care they need. These are some of the good things in that legislation that we need to keep and fix those that need changing.
Let me ask you about the transportation bill that was recently passed by the House and the Senate. That involves a lot of money for Arizona. You actually tried to add an amendment to that to help homeless veterans.
Yes, in my first attempt to amend the bill, and I got an opportunity to go to the well of the House to introduce an amendment to the transportation and HUD bills, which, by the way, they were passed, or it was passed as in one bill, with bipartisan support, one of the most important steps in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. The amendment that I offered would have taken money out of the HUD administration budget and put it into vouchers, housing vouchers for as many as 70,000 homeless veterans. I mean, it's a shame and a disgrace that any veteran should be homeless. Most of these are Vietnam-era veterans, but some of them now are the new Iraq and Afghanistan war veterans. We cannot allow this to happen in the future, and we need to take care of it. Unfortunately, the amendment failed. We did have some Republican support, but not enough. But the HUD and transportation bill actually is a good bill because it brings a lot of jobs to our state and to our country, and also solved the problem that was very near a disaster, which would have, had we not done that, would have increased the interest rate that students pay on student loans by doubling. We prevented that from happening by incorporating into this bill that passed with overwhelming bipartisan support.
And there was another environmental bill, or a border security bill, but some environmentalists are upset with you about it over waiving of environmental laws within 100 miles of the border in order to allow the Department of Homeland Security to better patrol.
That was the bill I got to vote on about a few minutes after I was sworn in. You know, border security is very important to the people who live in Congressional District 8. I've met over the long term with ranchers and business people who live on the border, who feel unsafe, who really feel unprotected because they just don't feel that the Border Patrol is paying attention to their needs. And as you may know, of course, 2 years ago, one of their own was killed, Rob Krentz was killed, and that just cannot be allowed to happen again. The border security measure, which was incorporated into a larger omnibus lands bill, would have increased the availability of public land to Border Patrol by 100 miles. I thought that was excessive, and I really believe that that needs to be much narrower amount of distance, more like what happens with private land, which is about 25 miles. We have to balance environmental protections with border protection. It doesn't have to be an either-or situation, and I want to make sure that we make the right decisions. You don't get to vote maybe in Congress. Well, you can, but that shows that you're kind of wimping out on a vote as far as I'm concerned. You really get to vote yes or no. And I voted yes for border security, and I'm hopeful that when the bill, if it ever comes back from the Senate, will be significantly modified, and I've talked with members of the Senate about this, that it will do what it needs to do without being overreaching and really wiping out a lot of environmental protections.
And with about 30 seconds, can you talk a little bit about just the experience of going back to Congress now that you've actually serving there?
It's been a wonderful experience. I just feel so honored to have been given the opportunity to serve this community once again in a different capacity, one I never expected to have. I've been very welcomed by both sides of the aisle. A number of Republicans have come over and said we want to help. A number of Democrats have obviously done the same. It's been an exciting time. We've had a lot of very important votes in a very short period of time. I'm really glad to be there. I'm glad to be serving the people of Congressional District 8, and I look forward to continuing that service into the future. It's a wonderful experience and a great opportunity, and I'm very grateful that the people of this district sent me to Washington to be their voice there.
Well, thank you for coming down and joining the Political Roundtable.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be here.
If you're interested in meeting with Congressman Barber or his staff, he will be in Oro Valley tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, at the Oro Valley Farmers Market. Big week in politics this week, Trent. We certainly saw a major story come out in the U.S. Senate race in the Arizona Republic last Sunday, revealing that Will Cardon, who is the businessman who is challenging Jeff Flake, had some problems with the INS a few years ago in terms of whether or not he hired folks who were in the country legally or not. We do now. The Flake campaign immediately rushed out and put together a TV ad and put it out. Let's take a look at that advertisement and review it.
I'm Jeff Flake, and I approve this message.
Will Cardon talks tough about illegal immigration.
We cannot let people break the law.
But federal agents say nearly 2/3 of Will Cardon's sandwich shop employees were illegal aliens.
This is an issue of the law, and so we need to hold everyone accountable to that.
Yes, Will Cardon. We do.
Trent, that ad, a pretty powerful ad there. How damaging is this story to the Cardon campaign?
Well, I think that if you go back to why is Will Cardon running, I think that the Achilles heel, that the perceived Achilles heel that Jeff Flake had was his stance on comprehensive immigration reform a few years back. And I think that's really what Will Cardon has been hitting him on. And I think this neutralizes that a bit. I think if it would have been something just a normal, it wouldn't have had a big impact. But this is the reason that that Mr. Cardon's been giving for running for office. So I think it hurts in a way. I'm not sure it's the difference maker in the election. I'm not sure that he was having the effect he wanted to anyway. I think that what it will do is it'll cause a lot more people to have a look at Van, the other challenger, the person we never talk about.
And Jeff, what's your thoughts on this one?
I agree with Trent. It was a pretty powerful ad. The attack line against Flake has been, basically the flip-flopper Flake. He was for comprehensive health care or comprehensive immigration reform, including the DREAM Act, and now he's suddenly morphed into the usual anti-immigration hardliner that the Republicans tend to nominate these days. So I think this sort of attacks Cardon right where he lives, right where he wanted to live anyway in this campaign. But how much traction he'll get out of that, I don't know. You've got to realize if you run a huge corporation that has a whole lot of little sandwich shops and it's one of your many huge corporations, how much do you really have to do with the hiring and firing of folks for minimum wage jobs in a fast food restaurant? So I think that's the reality of it is, but with what it is. But I think it is a hard-hitting commercial.
And then that's been Cardon's defense, that he wasn't involved in the day-to-day operations of these, and there wasn't a E-Verify at that time, and this is an attack essentially by the liberal media and by the Flake campaign. And they are swinging back. They have their own ad they put out this week, an ad that looks at a promise that Jeff Flake made to only serve 3 terms in Congress. Let's take a look at that ad.
I'm Will Cardon. I approve this message.
Jeff Flake broke his word on his term limit pledge.
Ask you about that 3-term self-imposed term limit. What happened?
I lied. I don't know what else to say.
Flake's not honest on conservative issues, criticizing and opposing SB 1070, supporting amnesty, lower in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. On illegal immigration and term limits, Jeff Flake's just not honest.
I lied.
So, Trent, again, there we see that you were talking about earlier about the Cardon's campaign focus on illegal immigration. How's that ad play among Republican conservatives?
Well, the thing of it is, the term limit thing was huge. It was huge a while ago. I don't really hear a lot about term limits nowadays. So it's not as big an issue as it was back then. And if it were a huge issue, then his constituents that voted for him wouldn't have sent him back into office. I think they liked his representation, and he felt that they needed him to represent them. So he ran again. As far as the what it's going to do, I mean, people that's pretty much baked into the cake. People know that about Jeff Flake, and they'll weigh that against what else they know about him. But I don't see that as really being a really effective commercial.
And this week and today, in fact, the Flake campaign got endorsements from both Senators John Kyle and John McCain, and is that helpful in the Republican primary?
I hadn't heard that. I think that if you get the endorsement of the person you're trying to replace, yes, that's always helpful. he had, Senator Kyle had a successful run, and I think people, pretty much look up to him and like him. So I think that in particular will be a very, very important endorsement.
And we back and forth in this Republican primary. I imagine Richard Carmona is probably happy to watch this, the Democrat candidate.
Well, I think we're loving it, but again, this feeds into the flip-flopper Flake image that everyone has tried to portray out here. The guy is, he's on tape saying I lied and then laughing about it. I don't think in the history of politics, someone has found a tape of a politician saying that they lied and then laughing about it. But I mean, certainly he tasted the power and of being in power and said, "Well, I want to stay." But you'd think he'd say, "I changed my mind," not that I lied, because now what is it? When is he telling us the truth? He certainly wasn't telling us the truth when he supported comprehensive immigration reform, because now he doesn't support it. And and everyone is not familiar with this, because remember, he ran in a small congressional district. He never had a tough campaign. So I think when voters start to see that this is a dishonest man statewide and that he'll lie about something that simple and admit to the lie, I think it's pretty troubling. And the fact that he had to go for his whole cards right now, it shows me that he's running scared. So I think Cardon's going to take a big bite out of him.
And you don't think that Cardon?
I don't see it at all. I think that Cardon, he's never come within 20 points in polling so far, and I don't see anything that's going to push him even closer right now. And speaking about comprehensive immigration reform, it's dead forever. And I'll tell you why. It's because nobody trusts that the executive, especially when Democrats are elected, will actually follow the laws passed by Congress. So what's the point of coming together with a compromise if the other side is just going to ignore the compromise altogether and do what they want to do anyway?
Well, it's probably dead forever because the Republicans will filibuster anything. I mean, we saw statistics that this has been the most ineffective Congress ever, mostly because of the Republicans.
All right. Let's move on to the Open Government Initiative, because we are short on time. But the Open Government Initiative is a way of changing the primary system so that all the candidates run in one large primary, and then the two top vote getters move on to the general election. There may be a legal challenge to this, but let's skip over that and just get to the merits of it. Trent, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'm a conservative. I'm very, very loath to see us just change the way things have been done forever and ever just on a whim. And it seems to me, on balance, a lot of these initiatives we get run into trouble and clarification later on. I mean, if you really are into this, I would suggest we see what happens with California. Watch that for a few years. See what happens rather than us just jumping in with both feet. I think in the end, you're going to find a lot of people are just going to say, well, why are we changing things? What we have is worked decently. Why change the entire way we run elections? It's almost like these things always end up to not be what we thought they were going to be, and whatever gains you get, they find a different way to game the system later on.
And Jeff?
I tend to agree. Let's let California be the guinea pig and see how it works out. I think it has admirable goals of depolarization and increasing turnout, but I'm a great believer in what I call the law of unintended consequences. And we've tried a lot of things. We tried allowing independents to vote in our primaries, both Republicans and Democrats, opening that up, I think, in 1998 or so. In 2000, we went to the Independent Redistricting Commission. We've gone to clean elections starting in 2000. All of these things did not pan out the way we thought they would. And so I think we should back away from this. And for instance, let me give you an idea of what happened in California. In the 31st congressional district in California, you had 4 Democrats running and 2 Republicans running in what is a very close seat. Either party could win it with a good candidate, and under the top 2 rules, the 2 Republicans won, the Democrats were squeezed out. Similar thing could happen in the current Congressional District 9 centered in the Tempe area right now. 3 Democrats, only the reverse. 3 Democrats are running and 7 Republicans are running. Under that scenario, I guarantee you that 2 Democrats would be in the top 2. So this is something that is not panning out, and it did not increase voter participation, one of the other stated goals, in the California primaries that we just saw. So I think it's troubling, and we need to let it play out for a while in California, and I would urge people to not adopt it here now.
All right.
Jeff does have a conservative bone in his body. Just
There you go. City of Tucson moved forward with an annexation of some property at River and Craycroft this week. There was concerns from the part of some county officials that the city was not going to be following some of the county regulations in terms, and also concerns about the road infrastructure up there and also the extension of the river park in that area. On the other side of the argument were people saying the county is too restrictive and was blocking this development from moving forward. Trent, your thoughts on how this played out?
Oh, look, I drive that road a lot. And here's my concern. And write this down. Trent Humphreys agrees with Chuck Huckleberry that this will be a huge burden on county people. Because what they've done, they've annexed the property, but they haven't annexed River Road and taken responsibility for River Road right there. And that road is already overused. It's already at a max before the school's built, before all the new things are put in there. Now, it probably could have supported that gas station they're putting in, but everything else, they're going to have to fix that road. And if you remember, when they tried to fix it last time, it opened a big sinkhole, and we had to fix that road 2 or 3 times. And that same thing is going to happen as further you go down that road. That's why they haven't fixed it to this point. So it's going to be a fiscal nightmare to make that road to where they can actually bring traffic to all the points and destinations that they want. And I think that, of course, the city council didn't look at any of that, or they don't care. And that's just a simple, is what we do here. We just don't look at things. We don't look at details. I'll notice that that in the county, if you're in the county and you see what's going on, you should be upset because you're going to have to pay for all those mistakes. The city's not going to pay for it. People in the county are.
Jeff,
well, the neighbors around that were something like 10-1 in favor of it. I mean, it was very popular in the area that was annexed. I'm a great believer in annexation. Lou Murphy, one of our former mayors here, said some 30 years ago you should annex from mountain range to mountain range, and he was right. I didn't know he was right back then. I was wrong, but I think he was absolutely right. We need to annex because we get our share of state revenue dollars that are shared, and we need those dollars here. This county is not nearly as incorporated as Maricopa County, so they get a lot more of those shared revenue dollars from the state. In addition to that, I think there is a good point to be had with the roadway. I travel through that area. I live not far from it. We're going to have to deal with an issue of the widening of the road. And the city probably needs to annex more of that, take in the next corner north of that and take in the full intersection. And I think the revenue dollars will be there to widen that road if they do that in the long run.
So yeah, that has to happen for that to be a good deal.
Okay, and then the city also moving forward with possibly using block grant funds from the federal government to help with repairing a crumbling structure of the Marist building downtown.
So
you're shaking your head.
The city is giving $1 million gift to the Catholic Church. There was no thought that went into that. I mean, the Regina Romero's comment that this is an atone for the sins past, it's not her job to atone for anything. It's her job to fill in the potholes and increase business. That's a business block grant that they're using to do this, and that's not helping Tucson business.
It's not. It's a block grant that can only be used for a few limited things, such as low-income housing, which last year we got $7.7 million, and we used $4.3 of it for low-income housing, and it can be used for blight remediation and a couple other purposes along those same lines. So you can't use that money to fill potholes. You can't use it to fix streets. You can't use it to pay firefighters and police officers. That money comes as a block grant with strings tied to it from the federal government. This is a good idea, and I'll tell you why. The building, and there's a proposal that has now got to be accepted by the Catholic Church, then it has to be accepted by the city. And that proposal would mean that the Catholic Church would not, the property could never be used for church purposes, only for public or private purposes. In addition to that, the city would have to get compensated for the $1.1 million. If the remediation of the property to stabilize it costs more than $1.1 million, the Catholic Church would have to pay for that, the rest of that money. In addition to that, it would provide the city could, if they chose to, take title to the property once that was done, because the Catholic Church is pretty much ready to abandon it. And it is a historical piece of property. It is the only, as I understand it, 3-story adobe building in the entire United States. And it's the last standing building in Barrio Historico. So we do have some kind of an obligation to preserve our past in this city. I mean, you look at this TCC that we're hardly using at all and can hardly be used. I mean, that place displaced one of the most historic neighborhoods in Tucson.
All right. Health care, of course, is a big issue remaining to be resolved here in the state. The governor, Brewer, has not yet decided whether or not to see if the state will participate in this expansion of Medicaid to people up to 133% of the federal poverty level. The legislature would also have to approve that. Trent, what should happen here?
Well, I think the governor would want to do that. I don't think the legislature is going to let her do that. Because, I mean, again, it comes with huge strings. Like everything comes with strings from the federal government. And what happens is, for the first year, they'll pay 90%. And as time goes on, they pay less, and they pay less until we run up our budget deficit, just like we did a couple of years ago. And I think that after what we saw for the couple of years ago, we'd rather build from within, and use our money for the things we need for education and other things first, and then worry about expanding to the wishes of the federal government.
All right, and we got about a minute left.
Well, morally, this is the right thing to do. We ought to cover these people and provide adequate insurance for them. But this is an economic driver. I mean, the dollars that you spend on health care are going to be an investment in the economy. They're going to hire more nurses, aides, and more health care workers all across the board. And so it's a responsible thing to do for our economy here. In addition to that, the hospitals and care providers, this is not free money. When people come into the emergency room and it's uncompensated care, that money is lost, and that somehow all of us taxpayers and ratepayers pay that somewhere along the line. And so we need to do something about it, and this will do it.
Well, I guess the legislature will have a say in this, but I spoke with Tim Hogan earlier today, the attorney who has sued the state in the past, and he said an initiative campaign could also lead to this expansion as well. So I guess we'll have to wait and see how that develops over time. But we are out of time here today, so thank you guys for coming in here. That's all we have time for tonight, but you can learn more about what's happening in politics by visiting azpm.org/yourvote. While you're on the website, we'd love to hear your thoughts about tonight's program, so be sure to leave us a comment. To find out the latest from AZPM, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Stay tuned next for the News Hour, and then at 8:30, tune into Arizona Week to meet the new University of Arizona president, Ann Weaver Hart. On Monday, Arizona Illustrated talks with the Mexican consulate about the Supreme Court's decision on SB 1070. I'm Jim Ninsel. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.